Audio on demand from Vision Christian Media.
You're listening to Momentum, a show that helps men succeed in life. And as we delve into this week's topic, a reminder that some of the content may be of a sensitive nature. Now, here's your hosts, Tim and Des.
All right, welcome to this week's Momentum, wherever you are around the country or even around the world if you're watching this on YouTube. It's really great to be spending some time with you and you with us, stepping into the space of Momentum. If you're not really familiar with Momentum, I encourage you to have a look around our website. It's behind me here, but also momentumaustralia.org, and find out a bit about what we do, what we hope to achieve. There's a whole bunch of stuff on the website too that will help you on your journey as resources, previous shows, etc. And if you'd like to support us as a ministry financially, we'd really love your support. MomentumAustralia.org. Of course, I'm always joined by my co-host and good friend Des Kennedy. How are you this week?
Really good. It's really great. It's lovely we were able to do this. And as our guest said, I'll let you introduce him, said earlier, it's so great to be in a country where we can do all this stuff. And God bless it. It's amazing. And while I'm talking, guys, don't forget, if you're doing life on your own, you need a safe and confidential conversation, reach out to the Momentum Care line. That's 1-800-000-MEN, 1-800-000-636, 7 days a week, 9 a.m. to 11 p.m., brought to us by our dear friends at Caroline. They're an amazing organization, so we thank them. And also, we've just taken a lot of our old videos and put them onto YouTube, so you now can see us as well as hear us. And that's Momentum_for_men. It's a weekly show, and you can access that via our website too.
Yeah, awesome. You know, the care line is so important. We all need safe spaces to talk about something, perhaps, that's happening in our life. And this week is going to be no exception because we are talking about a huge topic, and I'm super excited to get into this week's show. You know, a research study profiling pornography users in Australia found that 84% of men and 54% of women have viewed pornographic material at some stage in their lives. Study also found that 100% of young men and 82% of young women reported having viewed pornography, sadly confirming that pornography is considered by many the norm for young Australians.
Isn't that 100% and 82% just amazing? And, you know, on top of that, 70% of Christian men and 20% of Christian women admit to using pornography on a regular basis, while 75% of youth pastors and 64% of senior pastors say that porn has negatively impacted their ministry at some time. Clearly, porn is an issue both inside and outside of the church. But how do we even start to address these figures and help people break free from this addiction?
Yeah, Marshall Ballantine Jones is a father of four, a qualified Anglican minister with a few degrees in ministry, and also more recently, a PhD on evidence-based pornography addiction, exploring solutions to the negative effects of porn on teenagers.
His focus now is on pornography recovery, and he's helped spearhead the Resist program, a 5-week program that informs, convicts, supports, and enables effective change from pornography use. Marshall, join us on this week's Momentum. Welcome, man.
Thank you, guys. Very nice to meet you and nice to be here.
It's a bit of a long intro, but I think it was necessary. I mean, it paints the picture of just how much pornography is affecting people, right? I mean, those percentages and those statistics, Marshall, I mean, they are huge, let's be honest.
Look, they are huge. And what's, I guess, confronting is that the prevalence of porn use, regular porn use within mainstream Christian churches is consistent with the secular world and what we find in non-Christian communities. And in fact, we're finding that it's starting at a very young age. Average age of first-time exposure is 11 and a half. And so that's primary school. That's still on average pre-pubescent. And as I said, that's an average. So you've got some people who are being exposed younger. And what pornography is today, internet pornography from the mainstream providers, is so much more confronting than the titillating Playboy era that perhaps the older people in our audience will recall or remember or be aware that was around. They're confronted with some traumatic, high-octane, often abusive, high-definition, impersonal, brutal pornography. This is what primary school kids, their first exposure to the world of sex is. And generally it's because they get a phone at that age. The parents are not aware of what is accessible, and the kids can is the story of so many people, have access to porn for years and years before anyone else knows about it. And that's typically what happens. And so when you're talking about an 18, 19-year-old guy or even girl who has been accessing pornography, you find out that they've been doing it for 6, 8 years of their life, often daily. And it has just such a corrupting effect on the soul, on our view of each other, on sex, and it's debilitating for Christians who want to live a wholehearted discipleship.
You know, one of the things you said that really intrigued me was that any media that turns you on sexually can be defined as pornography. And when I sat back and thought about that, it's actually true. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so pornography is quite subjective. Most of us will think these days that porn is images or videos of people engaging in sexual behavior, and you'll find it on the internet. And you ask any young boy, young teenager, and that's exactly what he thinks. But it's not that for everyone. As it happens, for many females who engage in pornography, they're not interested in the visual style of porn and the aggressive style of porn that we see presented. Most mainstream porn is being designed and cultivated for the heterosexual male mindset, and females don't align with that on average. What a lot of females like are fantasy, a story, romance, and things which you don't capture in pictures but are very rich in literature. So that can be a common area that affects some groups of people. And of course, there's some quite what some people will call benign triggers, like, for example, just sexy advertising, music clips, video clips, the modern MTV culture, people's fashion. There could be some paraphilia ideas, stockings and shoes, which can be the things which, when people see, triggers their sexual desires in an unhelpful way. So in those contexts, for those people, that form of media is pornography.
I think we all agree on this call because we're people of faith particularly, and we know that pornography doesn't align with where we are trying to go on our own journey of faith. But I mean, all of us, I think, will probably have non-Christian friends who see no issue with pornography, right? They think that watching porn is normal, to some degree even healthy. There might be non-Christian couples who actually, engage in pornography together. In your research, do you think that many of the secular society accept that porn use is kind of normal and even healthy?
Well, I have no doubt that there are people in society accept it as normal and not a problem. Some might say it's healthy. But in terms of secular research, of which there are literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of peer-reviewed studies from around the world that have been done over the last 20 years, and they consistently point to porn being unhelpful, damaging, harmful at different layers and levels. So it's harmful to the individual. It's harmful biologically, harmful neurologically, harmful sexologically, because there's this arising phenomena amongst males in the Western world or anywhere where porn is accessible, and that is what they're coining PIDE, porn-induced erectile dysfunction. It's a phenomena where in some studies, over 50% of frequent porn users are struggling to have an erection in a real relationship because their sex system has been so dramatically rewired because of the years of using porn. And of course, when we use the phrase using porn, we need to be clear about what that means. They're not looking at porn for research or curiosity or an education. They're doing it for gratification. So people will masturbate over it. And when you masturbate, you invoke a very strong cocktail of neurohormones that have a very powerful effect on changing the way in which the brain thinks, acts, and feels. And this is crafting changes to how we then engage in sexuality. So that's affecting there. But at a societal level, porn is a hugely damaging and unethical enterprise. It always entails the exploitation of vulnerable people. The 99.9% of the participants in pornography are only doing it because they're desperate, not because they're magnanimous and generous to all the lonely boys and girls in the world. They are, they report coming from highly disadvantaged backgrounds, low socio-demographic contexts. More than half will live below the poverty line when they enter the porn industry, high rates of STIs, much higher rates of mental health disorders, suicide risk, and of course, even after they leave the industry, if we want to call it an industry, it's not an industry. It's just it's an exploitation, usually by crime connected, mafia linked exploiters who are after money. We find that these people can't escape their past because content is always on the internet. They report high levels of trauma, high levels of abuse in the process of making porn, let alone abuse from their background. Can't get a job in the real world afterwards, stigmatized. It's highly abusive to those people. And that's just porn itself. And then there's the effect on broader society. We're seeing that porn is the principal trigger in the hypersexualized demand in mainstream media, which is flowing onto all the sorts of shows and influences in social media and Netflix and so forth that create more sexual normalization, if we use that word you used before, Des. And lastly, that's just flowing onto young people behaving and acting more sexually, which is seeing all sorts of disastrous outcomes from mental health and depression, anxiety, and particularly to a disproportionate and unfair attention to females, sexualizing and objectifying them. So it's not ethical at a sexual level because it's hurting so many people in society, or so that people who are in their individualistic mindset think they have a right to an orgasm.
Yeah, and it's interesting, you'd mentioned the age of 11, and, a child at 11 would be hugely impacted in terms of their thoughts about their mother, their sister, their aunts, their cousins. I mean, that would be a serious damage to them.
Oh, absolutely. If anyone has encountered the recent book, The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, who's done a really brilliant job at describing how critical adolescent development is in those first few years of high school and later primary school for setting up thinking and feelings for the rest of their life. We're talking about kids who before that age, when their brains are just entering into their massive neurodevelopment, adolescent neurochange development, where they do synaptic pruning and so forth and get ready for the adult brain. This is where they keep thinking in acting and being crafted to understand sex in this way. It's having incredibly negative impact. So, if we took an 11-year-old kid in society and found out that they were being exposed against their will to neighbours engaging in sexual activity in their backyard or something like that, we'd be all jumping up and down saying that's abuse of the child. He shouldn't be exposed to that. We should call the police in and deal with that. But our ISPs, our internet service providers, warehousing vast quantities of abusive material to these vulnerable kids, and no one seems to be doing much about it in society and trying to prevent it. We have a half-hearted response from the E-Safety Commission and our governments, and in the Western world it's similar. People don't have a stomach to fight the libertarian groups and the choice groups and so forth, and yet our kids, year in, year out, a new generation comes through that's being susceptible to this abuse. So it starts hard, it starts young, and it's not really good.
Okay. Let's take a short break there, and let's come back into the second part of the show and explore, again, some of these big things which have moved us to where we are today. We are going to take a short break and come back in just a moment. Stay tuned.
This is Momentum, a show that helps men succeed in life. Find out more at momentumaustralia.org.
If this program has highlighted something you'd like prayer for, we'd love to pray for you. Call 1-800-PRAY-FOR-ME. That's 1-800-772-936. It's a free call. Or text 0401 132 888.
You're listening to Momentum, a show that helps men succeed in life. Find out more at momentumaustralia.org.
All right, part two of this week's show. It is Tim and Des with you once again on Momentum. And Marshall Ballantine Jones is a father of four, a qualified Anglican minister with a few degrees in ministry, and also more recently, a PhD on evidence-based pornography addiction, exploring solutions to the negative effects of porn on teenagers. Marshall, let's get to some of the reasons that we as men particularly will go to pornography. For you said in your own experience, it was stress relief in times of, stress or whatever, you get triggered, you'll go there as a release. In your research, do you think that the porn use is always just kind of masking something? Like it's masking something, whether it is stress or boredom or, again, fantasy perhaps? Or is it something deeper perhaps, like a deeper unresolved wound or something that we're trying to numb out and nurse perhaps through pornography?
That's a terrific question, Timothy. The research is changing in this space, and it's changing because of the patterns and behaviours of porn access have changed since the advent of the phone and broadband internet. So historically, if I go back 30 years and before that, and we asked why do people look at porn, you'd find they used it to soothe because they had deeper issues in their lives. And that still happens with many people when you've got unresolved tension and displacement. And porn is a great and simple and quick fix to go dose yourself with feel-good chemicals. Dopamine feels good, but endorphins feel good. Enkephalins feel good. Endocannabinoids feel good. It makes you feel good, right? And for a short period of time, you'll forget those stresses. So for some people, it is still the case that porn is really like the exhaust fumes of an engine problem. And in that case, I think people do need to spend some time and explore with the support of a professional, a therapist, who they are and why they function, what they do and what those triggers are. Everyone needs to get a better appreciation of what those triggers are. But we also know that now there's just mundane triggers and people will go to porn. When they want to feel something, they've trained their brain to go to porn. And that's more and more often the case for our younger generations who just started with porn, not because they were traumatized or escaping difficulties, that they just had access to it. And it just became something that there was no reason not to go to it. So when people are bored, they will go to porn. They discovered that over the COVID period, more and more people were engaging with porn in that period of lockdown because they were bored. And they didn't have anything else to do, and it was recreational. So recreation can be a reason. But also fear and anxiety, depression, these traits are more and more common now in society, particularly amongst younger generations who have been exposed to high levels of the internet. And porn happens to be a great medicine against feeling anxious and depressed. So those can be triggers. And then, opportunity. It doesn't actually take much for you to get triggered these days. So as Des said before, you can see something now that you're not looking for, you have not searching for, you didn't even ask for, but then suddenly you got turned on. And when you get turned on in the brain, as soon as you get that spike of desire, it will start turning on the dopamine taps. And when the dopamine taps turn on, the first victim of the brain is the prefrontal cortex, which is your decision-making and executive control, self-discipline component of the brain. Its messages get blocked. You stop thinking once dopamine gets turned on. And once you stop thinking, then nothing's stopping you from going ahead and just engaging in pleasure. And so just a simple trigger that you don't look for can be all it takes to spin you off into another cycle of what you later will feel as regretful behavior.
Maybe a final thought before we wrap up this show, Marshall, is you mentioned before about, you're not watching porn for research, right? And I love that. It's like, let me do some research here. No, I mean, let's be honest. But I did want to clarify for some, because there might be men who masturbate, but don't necessarily masturbate to pornography, right? So it is a separate thing. But again, does the same kind of underlying trigger apply? It's a release. And as a Christian man, do you think that there's some degree of, well, that's better than using pornography, but it still doesn't address the initial problem or underlying problem?
Well, great question. Again, so masturbating to fantasy is different to masturbating to pornography, because pornography itself is an activity which is inherently evil, right? There's nothing good about pornography within itself because it brings so much harm, and that's inescapable. And even people who want to argue there's a ethical porn or OnlyFans where we're bypassing the middleman, that is very quickly exposed to be just rubbish. Porn is porn, and it always creates victims. Park that to the side and take someone who's masturbating to fantasy. Well, okay, a couple of points here. Firstly, within the Bible, there's no mention of masturbation. And so it's a great frustration to us who are trying to get a clear word from the Lord about how do I pursue this area and how do I address it. Why is he so silent? And so I think people need to sort of take a little bit of a step back and say, well, what is said in the Bible? Jesus was emphatic in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5 that if you look upon a woman lustfully, you've committed adultery in your heart. And he then went to say it's better that you, if your eye causes you to sin, to carve it out. If your hand causes you to sin, to cut it off, than to enter heaven maimed, then go to hell. Now, one of the things that Jesus is doing there is reminding people that adultery in the Old Testament had a death penalty. And now he's leveling the playing field, saying your thoughts are on the same level as that, and they have the same consequence to God. All right, so misplaced sexuality matters to God. And so we need to get back and say, what is God's plan for sex? And it was a glorious plan, a spectacular plan. I've already hinted with a little brief about science. It says that it reinforces the unity of a marriage, and that's the place where it should be, where it's reserved for. God wants you to have enjoyable, fantastic sex in marriage. If you're not in marriage, he doesn't want you to do that, and you will survive without it. Even though we have raging hormones at times, we can survive without masturbating. I say this to the school students when I speak to them, because often the teenage boys can't imagine life without masturbating. And I say, guys, you can do it. You can, you don't need to masturbate. If your mum walks in and catches you, you're not going to keep going, right? You're going to be embarrassed and it will stop. They all have a laugh, but they realize it's true. If you see someone pretty in public and you have a spurt of desire, you're not going to start masturbating then, are you? No. So we know we have boundaries where we can enforce discipline very quickly. So really I don't need to masturbate to survive as a Christian. And if I practice not masturbating, well, lo and behold, I can actually get better at that. So I think that's the first thing people need to say. Secondly, it's almost impossible to masturbate without a fantasy. All right. So some people say they can, but I've not met that person in real life, and I can't imagine it. I need a sexual trigger for my thoughts, and if it's not connected with your spouse, well, then I don't think that's appropriate. And so, what we really want to be doing is pursuing self-control as a very essential aspect of being Christian. It's something we need to develop discipline in. It's something that we need to practice and prepare for, and put boundaries in place to minimize the temptation and to have alternative outlets and experiences that I can turn to when I am bored or displaced or anxious or tired. That doesn't have to be that. Because if I do uphold God's vision of sex, what I realize is it's so important and precious to God that I want to honor it even if I'm not in a sexual relationship. And so to do that, I treat it with the preciousness that it is. And part of that is by making sure I don't abuse it in my mind. The last thing to say is that, just as a warning, right, if you are a person who masturbates to fantasy, you've got to understand you do unleash the powerful hormones that you are in any other sexual engagement, which includes vasopressin and oxytocin, the bonding chemicals. You can bond to a fantasy. It can be the thing that dominates you after a while, the thing you turn to. And that's unhelpful. People can develop unhealthy obsessions with other people, with individuals they know, or with certain categories of people. And then that can flow on to the way in which we relate to each other. Now, if we get to treat people as God says they are to be treated, which is people who are his image bearers, and if they're Christian, who have his spirit dwell in them and are owned by him, it's dishonoring to think of people in that way. And we don't want to dishonor people in that way. We want to honor people. And so that starts in the mind and starts with our intentions. So I just would say they're different. Fantasy masturbation is different to porn, but they still runs into the same ultimate problems, that they are misaligned with God's vision of good sexuality. And with discipline, we don't have to surrender to those temptations.
It's great. Love it. Absolutely love it. And that's a great way to finish up the first show. What we are going to do is come back next week and look at some practical solutions for men who are struggling in this area with pornography or addiction, if it's gotten to that stage. The good news is it is possible to be set free and stay free. And we're going to have another conversation with Marshall Ballantine Jones next week about this. In the meantime, I'm going to point you to a couple of websites, resistporn.org, and also resistprogram.org. Have a look around at those. If you are struggling in this area, want some more information in this area, and we're going to come back and unpack this next week. And there is hope. There's hope for people in this area. And again, if you need a conversation, if this has triggered some stuff for you, the care line, 1-800-000-636. If you need a confidential conversation about something we talked about today or just something that's happening in your life, reach out to the care line. Marshall, it's been a great conversation. We look forward to getting you back on Momentum next week, mate. Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Momentum, a show that helps men succeed in life. For more information or to hear this week's show again, go to momentumaustralia.org. You can also access a whole range of resources to help you on your journey and to get in touch with the team at momentumaustralia.org. Until next time, keep moving forward with Momentum.